Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Y: The Last Man, Season 1, Episode 3. It's called Neil. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. And I was a little bit more mixed on this one, I hate to say, versus Episode 2. Not that Episode 2 was perfect, but Episode 3 I felt was a lot more bumpy, and I think it comes down to just what characters it was focusing on. There's certain characters who are more engaging, and unfortunately, this episode did not have Hiro and Sam in it. It did seem... It was probably Yorick's best episode yet, so that's good. His chemistry and what little of it we get with 355 this episode is a positive sign, because they are going to be spending a lot of time together, so that is good. But unfortunately, the characters we do spend a lot of time with in this episode, particularly Kimberly Campbell Cunningham, which just sounds... She sounds like she has a name that suits her, I guess is what I'm saying, without going into any more detail. She is actively kind of annoying as a character, and I know she is kind of an antagonist, right? And she is a villain in the perspective of like how she is going against our main characters, mainly Jennifer, but she is kind of this antagonistic force within their current government setup. I get that, and I get that she's supposed to be manipulative and conniving and playing the game and trying to like eke out information, but honestly, after a couple of scenes of it, I was starting to get really bored with it and really frustrated by her playing her game. And I think it's because this character just feels super generic TV, and I wasn't feeling a lot of great things from her. And even when it was doing what it was intended to, there's a scene later on in the episode, her final scene in the episode, in fact, where she's with Jennifer and they're looking at the memorial wall, and she starts talking about various men and holds her hand. And now, of course, the whole point of it is that it is kind of leading up to this sort of more sinister end to the conversation, which is her not necessarily implying, like, I don't know if she believes that Yorick is actually alive yet. I don't know if she has enough to really buy that yet, but at the very least, the fact that her mother caught a glimpse of him and she is describe someone who looks like Yorick, not like anyone she knew herself, not some random person, not some generic guy. It was specifically someone who looked like Jennifer's son, and she says that to Jennifer, and it kind of ends on this tense moment where Jennifer's trying to keep her cool and not reveal anything's going on, because Yorick's existence, of course, is a secret, and that's a big part of what we're going to talk about in this episode. But even in this scene, I wasn't and maybe part of it's the casting, maybe part of it is I just don't like the actor that much. I'm not sure, but I think part of it is possibly just that it feels very TV, and I don't like. It's been a long time since I read the comic, but I don't remember this specifically. Like, I don't remember this character at all, and that's not to say that she wasn't there, but in contrast, in this episode when they mention the scientist they're going to go to, whose name I've forgotten, funnily enough, almost trying to like belittle my point here, but as soon as they mentioned, Dr. Mann, as soon as they mentioned Dr. Mann, I was like, oh yeah, that name, it dinged in my head. I was like, ding 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 ding, I remember that name. And I remember kind of what that character is like for when we do get to her, but everything, I don't know why I say that everything they're adding, because clearly there's other things they are adding that are really good additions to what the book did. It's kind of weird to me though, just how generically TV this character feels at times. And maybe she's in the book, and maybe everything I'm saying right now is just nonsense. But even if she is in the book, her plotline in this show thus far and how her character is portrayed is kind of this like almost what's the correct wording here? I just don't want to say anything too harsh. That's almost this Republican, well, not wife, Republican daughter in this case, but this, rich blonde woman, snooty, like there's Karen vibes, okay? Not that Karens typically, we're not usually talking about the wealthy people when we're talking about Karens, but like there's definitely kind of a rich Karen vibe coming off from her a lot, and there's definitely some other stuff in this episode that like this potential other woman who could claim the presidency, who was technically higher ranking than Jennifer, who they assume was dead, and was presumed. She wakes up after being in presumably a coma and being operated on in Israel. After during the crisis, during the incident, of course, there were accidents left, right, and center because of just various things. And she wakes up and she has to be told that all the men are dead. And I actually, I'm really conflicted on this scene. This is the really frustrating thing when it comes to certain plot lines or certain things in a show like this, where on paper I kind of like what this does for this character, because it's almost a joke that when she's told that all the men have died and that you're going to have to grieve anyone you know as a man, she takes about 3 seconds and goes, wait, if that's true, I'm the president. And I basically kind of laughed out loud because it was almost so silly that our mind went there. And I don't necessarily hate it, because it kind of shows you what type of character or what type of person she is, right? That she immediately thought about it in those terms. Immediately went, wait a minute, I'm the highest ranking woman. That means I'm the president. That was her first thought. She's not concerned for her loved ones, should she have any. Given what we hear about her from the other characters after this, that she's this fringe nutcase who, they kind of they kind of describe a character who I think we've all become very familiar with in the world over the last couple of years, especially. Some ultra right wing sort of podcast, social media presence, who was given a platform and a position by this Republican president, and so this little cabinet that's currently functioning around Jennifer, all of them are in agreement. This woman cannot be president. This is a disaster. She cannot be the one making decisions. She's a idiot at best and an extremist at worst. We can't have her running this place. Even though there's even one or two of the women who I think were were Republican and were part, but like no. He even everyone on his team thought he made a crazy choice by picking this woman. This was kind of a stunt placement, and like, we have to all stick together on this. We have to all back this and say, no, we can't. Like, this woman is, no, we can't. No, she cannot run this show. And so anyway, to get back to the scene at hand, like, I'm kind of laughing at it, and I kind of appreciate the point of what it is, but at the same time, it came off so cartoony that it was kind of hard to take it seriously in a way that I think the show wanted me to take it. And it kind of frustrated me, because I was like, there's a lot of like cool stuff here. That this idea of waking up into this world and having to find out months later that all the men are dead, like seeing someone have that realization and finding that out for the first time could be a great moment. And I can't help but feel like they wasted the idea on a scene where they wanted the because we don't know who this woman is at first. It's kind of almost a twist in the scene when she says, and this is smart, they did reference the fact that there was one other person who would have been president, but she died. That's what they believe, right? That was mentioned earlier in the episode, which is smart. It was smart to introduce us to that idea, so that when this scene came and she said that at the end of the scene, we knew exactly who she was, and that there was some validity to this, that it wasn't just some nut job who was, crazy. But I don't know, I feel like they whiffed like potential by having this character have this scene, as opposed to someone else waking up and getting that. I don't know, it felt a bit weird to me. So yeah, and that was the other thing, is once the others do find out about her and they make this choice and say, no, we have to all agree that she can't be president, immediately Kimberly is sort of like assembled the Republican wives and daughters and whoever else, and they're storming down the hallways and saying that their views matter, and you know, do I think it partially is? I think obviously I love when, because, and to be fair, like I think all good writing in some way has something to say, and I do love when science fiction is used to explore real world problems, real world ideas, divides, whatever it may be. I think the issue right now with this political fight, this political sort of conflict that is rising in this all-woman government, is that it's not different enough. It's a little bit just too directly the talking points that we actually have. You know, it's like it's not that it's not somewhat realistic to a point, like, because part of me was getting annoyed at Kim's character, that she's still so cartoony, like so much of a caricature of what she is in scenes like this where she's yelling out, you know, our values matter. But it's one of those things where, like, I don't necessarily want a show like this right now to be directly using that terminology and directly having characters have this debate. I am far more interested, you know, when this is done well, and I'm thinking of things like The Expanse, or something where you have really interesting politics that are completely their own and completely unique to the world that was created for the story. But of course, what makes them feel real and what gives them validity is that essentially at the center of the whole thing is that the ideals are still the same. And that's what makes it still super relevant. That's what still makes it feel like we're still talking about the same people that exist in the world, but we're doing it through this different lens. And you're sort of like saying, okay, this is, in this scenario, this is where things sort of like go to. And obviously, I'm not arguing, in no way am I arguing that this isn't like a good idea or realistic in some way to have the government that's left to then kind of like start politicizing and fighting and making it about who's in power rather than actually trying to solve the crisis and all the rest of it. Like I'm sure there would be, you know, vapid people. I'm sure there'd be pettiness. I'm sure there would be all sorts of malicious shit. Like I have no doubt that in some level that would be there. But it's one of those things where I don't know if this is quite nuanced enough, or is presenting me with a character who is interesting enough on her own to carry this, to make it engaging, because it kind of has to be really engaging, because if it isn't, it's just kind of like depressingly like real. And when I say real, obviously it's also cartoony. Like I feel like I'm mixing up what I'm trying to say here. Like if we were watching like a great actor who was a master manipulator, and what's funny is that, you know, there's kind of a hint that 355 is kind of that, and Kimberly is not. In fact, there's actually probably the one scene that I kind of like with Kimberly is the scene where she talks to 355 and is trying to like get information out of her, and she tries to be friendly and says, "Hey, I have, you know, I play cards with the Secret Service ladies. How about you should come to that?" And 355 is like smiling at her and thanking her for being so friendly and welcoming. And this scene was pretty good because it did this thing where you knew that Kim was trying to manipulate her and trying to get close just for information. But you also got the feeling that 355 is actually good at this. And she's also just, like, the smile's not real. The smile, like, she is good at manipulating people. She's actually good at what Kim is, like, constantly trying to do, in terms of a skill set. And that was an interesting scene because of that, because it was like sort of giving me this insight into this character. But there's no insight to have for Kim. She's kind of one note. And a few characters have that problem right now, admittedly. But she's more garish. She's more garishly one note, right? She's more in her face. She's more loud. And we have to sort of hear her yammer on more. And there comes a point, if it's not like nuanced enough where we're still just hearing someone entitled like yell about how entitled they are. It's still kind of annoying, and I feel like I'm really harping on this, but like I am concerned. I am concerned about this plot line. I'm concerned about her character going forward. Because I really wasn't enjoying most of any of the times she was on screen, and unfortunately, like she gets a lot of screen time this episode. Like, this is very much, and like I say, there was no Hiro or Sam, and I was liking those characters and what they were setting up with them. The other character that I'm not really feeling that much right now, and this was kind of true in episode 1 as well, was Nora. I feel like obviously her character doesn't have the problems that Kim's does, right? It's more just that her character feels a bit more I don't know, a bit dull, a bit bland. Like there was a lot of moments with her character in this, which is her and her daughter, and they basically are told by whoever they're staying with right now that whoever they know who's taking them in another city or wherever they're going only has room for X amount, so they're not taking Nora and her kid, and they've been left behind. And there's a small moment where Nora tries to say this to her daughter, like, "Oh, we're staying behind because they'll just slow us down," and her daughter just looks scared, like, "Wait, what?" Like, she's not really buying this at all. Like, Nora's trying to sell, like, this was her choice, like, this is better for them, and it isn't. And their plot, sort of devolves to going back to their house to get some stuff, and the daughter cuts her leg because she foolishly runs and falls whilst trying to shoo away the vultures who are trying to get the husband and son. And I think what gets me about this plot is, again, there's some ultra TV melodrama kind of creeping into it that doesn't have the kind of the skill or just I don't know, any kind of spark that sets it apart. Or we've seen enough TV shows at this point about post-apocalypse worlds or dystopias where there's an event that changes the world, that you do have to have the strong characters, you have to have the strong writing now. And there's a couple of things here that, like on paper, I like the scene where they're leaving the house in the car and the radio comes on for like 10 seconds, and they're like, "Oh, there must be power somewhere," and they look so happy. It's like a comfort to hear music once again, and then it turns off after like 10 seconds, and they just look so deflated. Like, oh no, our one little slither of hope is already gone. And like in theory, I really like this moment. It kind of occurred to me right there and then that this sounds like a great idea, this little moment that I would be praising if I really cared about these characters, but I kind of don't yet. Like I kind of like I don't dislike Nora as much as I do Kim, but every time it cuts to the plot, I just kind of like go, "Oh, here we go. We're back to the depressing plot that feels like it belongs in a Walking Dead spin-off or something." I don't know. It is so bland, and this also had one scene that was kind of laughably bad, if I'm honest. I glossed over it intentionally earlier, but there's a scene, it's actually kind of great how bad it is, where they get home and Nora finds a Ninja Turtle, the sacred Raphael. I think it was Raphael anyway. But the arm is missing, and she's looking at it, and she starts rummaging through this little basket of like toys and loose things, and she's like almost getting. It's like it starts off quite calm, but she's getting a little bit more like hectic about it and getting a little bit more frenzied, and then she finally like she gets to the bottom of the basket, and there it is, the arm, and then once again the sacred Raphael could be complete, and she was happy because it was one man that she could put back together. I don't know, I just that scene, like it's like there's kind of a fine line, right? There's a fine line when you kind of cross over into becoming melodrama, and I think some restraint and how the moment's handled, restraining the writing at times, like, you know, a moment where she sees one of her son's toys and gets emotional about it, like it's almost cliche because like you've seen variations of that like 100 million times. Every any story where someone's died and someone sees an object related to them afterwards, right? It's a plug-in moment effectively, and making it a specific thing, like in this case a Ninja Turtle, right? It's a little bit weird because it's kind of like you're kind of thinking about product placement in a moment where you're supposed to just be thinking about the emotion of it. So that's kind of the first problem with it. You have the actual sequence play out where she feels like relieved to be able to put it back together again. And it kind of feels like it's aiming for some symbolism here, like why she's satisfied she was able to fix this. That it rings really false. It feels like a really contrived moment that you would normally get in like an indie movie like an indie movie where the director like thinks he's like a new auteur and they're going to try their best to do like a crazy like dramatic moment that's got like irony and all the rest of it. And I would never blame the attempt at such a thing, of course, because everyone should try and improve and get better and whatnot. But the moment made me laugh. Like I genuinely started smirking and grinning, and eventually sort of chuckled a bit when she got the arm back. And I hate being mean. I don't want to be mean, but I kind of feel like being mean about that scene because it just made me chuckle. So those are the negative things. I got the negative things out of the way. Most of Yorick and 355 I quite like. Yorick sneaking around. I mean, I wasn't necessarily into the old woman following him as much, but everything with like him choosing, like he finally feels like he's starting to have a bit of a character. Him saying that he like why him, and like can't we find someone better, or even just like him asking the question like how many other men have you found? Like he just assumes that he's not the only one, because of course he does. Why would he assume he's literally the only one? Like he truly expects that there's probably it's obviously rare, most of the men died, but if I survived, then presumably maybe 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, whatever the ratio may be, but there must be some others. So obviously that hits him a little bit, because now, because before, presumably he's been sort of just hiding on his own. He doesn't really know, but now this is kind of a wider confirmation. It's not. I mean, it's not a guarantee that there's not another one hiding like him somewhere, but it's definitely painting a broader picture than he had before. So, 355, all of her arguments to why he like isn't safe there, why they have to like have a plan, why they have to get him away from there, both for his own safety, for the safety of like using him to like maybe help like ensure the future of the human race, but also for the safety of Jennifer and what people will say, because her son, the president's son, somehow survived, and we see the pilots debating that very thing. So all of this thought process, all of this stuff is far more interesting. That stuff is pretty solid. And like I say, Yorick having these moments where he doesn't really want to be the hero. He just wants to go find Beth. Although he does have one moment that's kind of annoying where he says he's engaged. It's like, I think you read that proposal a little bit differently than we all did, Yorick. But like I said earlier, I think his chemistry with 355 and her kind of the way she can sort of like turn on the smiley face and ask him to do sort of get him to jump onto a pile of dead bodies, or the way she talks to the pilots. Like this episode was a big episode for her in many ways, because it was really getting a chance to see her operate in different ways and in different scenarios and how she talks to people. And the ending, of course, is kind of a grim idea of like what she's willing to do, because there's earlier on in the episode, not remembering like anything particular from the book, but there's just a moment in the episode where Jennifer turns around and says, "What about the pilots?" And she just says, "Oh, I can deal with them." And it sounded like, what do you mean deal with them? kind of sounds like you're going to kill them. Like you're going to have them whacked. Like you're going to have them, sleeping with the fishies, as it were. And sure enough, when she sort of like gives them the medals and she sort of convinces them that they're on the secret squad, but then the helicopter they're in has went down, and it kind of makes her look very manipulative, because the last thing that we saw from her before they went on the helicopter is she tells them thank you, for their help, and it comes across as this very kind of, I don't want to say genuine per se, because I think even at the moment I was reading it as like manipulative, but impressively manipulative, I suppose. Like certainly it felt, the response to it felt genuine, I guess, is maybe the important part, is that the pilot kind of smiled back and was receptive of the thanks. So yeah, that stuff really solid, and and obviously the implication is heavily that she probably sabotaged their helicopter so that they would die, and maybe Yorick even has that thought at the end, and that's something that this relationship is going to be starting off at a rocky standpoint, because Yorick even said to his mum a few times that he's not sure, like, can they even trust her? She's like this super secret agent person, like who knows who she's really working for. So some interesting stuff on that front. I enjoyed their interactions for the most part, and I thought it was a good study of 355. I think Jennifer does get another moment as well that's really nice. Obviously has some nice ones with Yorick, but she has a really good standalone scene as well with there's like not a phone call, but like especially essentially a phone call. It's over a radio, talking to a woman that they need, like the only one who's qualified to get, like, I think it's like a power plant, like a nuclear power plant up and running, and so that the city can have power. And this is mentioned a couple times throughout the episode, that this woman kind of like, she's distraught because she's lost both of her sons, and she just doesn't want to do anything. She's shutting down. Like a lot of people probably are in this world still so soon after the incident. And Jennifer, I think, gives a great speech to convince this woman. She talks about her kids. She asks what her sons, what ages they were. Talks about her experiences with them. But I thought her final point was a really great one, because whenever you have a big concept like this in a science fiction show, when you start to deal with things that are specifically interesting and specifically a cause and effect because of what the direct concept is, and I just mean, and I mean specifically in its own, like, in terms of originality, right? So what I mean is that so much of the show and so much of the crisis that the characters are dealing with, well, obviously they're all women, and that's a little bit different. For the most part, the situations they are trying to solve are the same things that a lot of stories with an incident, like a Leftovers, or like and maybe that's a bad example because we didn't really get a lot of initial aftermath of that, but or even like a Walking Dead or something. The idea of, like, we need food, we need fuel, we need clean water, we need where survivors are. Like, there's so many shows on various scales that deal with these exact same questions, that handle these exact same issues. So even though, yes, we have this flip on the fact that it's not just half the population that died, it's just all the men specifically. The end of this speech, where Jennifer says to her that, yeah, like, I'm doing the best I can, but the world doesn't need politicians right now. It needs women like you, who went to work every day in a profession where you were the only woman at the table, right? Where you're the only one in the room, which means you're the only one who can do this now. And that's that's something I don't think it's an accident that, and when I talked about this in episode 1, and I think I even mentioned it again in episode 2, that one of the interesting effects of this, based on the world we currently live in, is how many jobs are more heavily skewed towards men, and as a result, that presents a problem. And I thought this speech here, because it directly tied into the core premise of the show, and in a way that was kind of hopeful and uplifting, in a way that said, you're important because you have these skills, because you have this experience that very few women do, and like, I need to ask you to step up. I need to ask you to be strong enough in this time of grieving to do this. And you effectively, as much as we talk about Yorick kind of having to, accept that he is important, that he is effectively going to have to be this hero, and not in a classic sense, but in the sense that he has to essentially give up any idea of a normal life. That's what the conversation he had with his mother was, right? So in that sense, he has to go play hero and sort of accept that he's more of a device for humanity now than he is a person, and that's something he'll struggle with. But so is everyone who has to like pitch in right now. So is everyone who, despite what they have lost in the awful world that they might now be living in, especially since, like, I mean, she may have been a single mother, but there's a very reasonable chance that she also had a husband, the father of her kids, right? So she lost sons and a husband. She's lost her whole family, and like all of this, I think, is a really, really great moment that kind of paints what some of the more optimistic messaging that can maybe come out of this show. It feels cheesy to just say that we can kind of like have some girl power, but like, yeah, like that, at its core, if that's what you want to call this, is being like kind of, that this should have a feminist spin on it, right? It absolutely should. Why wouldn't it? And it's kind of like, why, at least right now at this part of the show, when we're still dealing with all this kind of the darkness of this world that we're in, why the scenes with Kim are a bit frustrating, because her character represents, or I don't say represents, but her character, like the speech she gives at the end when she's talking to Jennifer, she has a particular part of the speech stuck out to me where she basically sounds like she worshipped men, right? Where she's saying, all those men, all the women who have lost men and are devoted to their men, like I appreciate them. I don't know the right word, the exact word, but it was something like that, where she kind of started praising other women who sort of made it their goal to be there for their man, to love the man in their life and to support the man in their life. And it felt like it's just a message that I don't think the characters in this show need to be thinking right now, because ultimately the uplifting part of the show should be that they can rebuild and they can run the world and they can do all these things. So in this little microcosm of this moment, I thought Jennifer, as the president with her speech, nailed the idea here and nailed the idea of what should feel great about this premise when the wins come. And the wins won't come too often, and probably not for a while, by and large. But when the wins do come, it should be uplifting in some way, and this kind of nailed that. So yeah, and I'm sure there's like an analysis for this as well that I can't even like hit, because I'm just not like, I don't have the experience or the intellectual, well, not intellectual, but I'm about to call myself an idiot there. I don't have the experience, and I've not studied like the subject on an academic level or anything. I'm sure, like, Why the Last Man as a concept is, I'm sure, something that like a professor in some university could like write a thesis on, and talk about like the concepts in it. And as a concept, I don't mean this show deserves that treatment. The comic book might deserve the treatment, but just in terms of what it can explore with this, and I'm sure there's maybe some similar concepts that have happened, but certainly none that I've encountered or been on this scale. So that speech was great. It's just sad that I found myself really not enjoying like at least half of this episode. And there's characters now and conflicts now that I like that are obviously going to be a part of the show going forward that I'm just not that into, and that's kind of a shame. Now I'm recording this on Monday. In fact, episode 4 it airs today, or airs tonight. So I'll have this go out tomorrow. So episode 4 will have already aired by the time this goes out, but I should have the next one hopefully pretty soon, and I'll be caught up. And the fact that I was instantly behind because they put out 3 episodes, we can forget and move on with our lives. But I'm still bitter because it's annoying. But yeah, so I'm more frustrated after this episode, which is a shame because there's things I like, And I think the concerning thing is that it's just straight up certain characters and their plots that I'm not liking. If it was just like random things that didn't feel quite right or whatever, that'd be okay. And it's not to say that everything else is like destined for greatness either. Like I don't know for sure that the main plot with Yorick and 355 is going to be great, but I certainly saw signs to be positive this episode. I certainly saw promising ideas this episode. So I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, Kimberly's a bit of a caricature and an annoying one to listen to at that. So it's that's a bit of a problem. But okay, but that is my thoughts on episode 3 of Y the Last Man. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Like and subscribe. All that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to support the channel and the show and everything that happens here, you can do that obviously by hitting those buttons on YouTube, but you can also do it by going to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and supporting for as little as $1 per month. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?